Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reddit Roast number 61. I am joined by the man, the legend, John Cheng, one of our fellow admissions consultants here at Sam Weeks Consulting. John, good to see you again.
It's been a while, Sam. Nice to see
It's
you.
been a while. Great to have you back. So, John, today we have a quite a quite an interesting bunch of profiles, in my opinion. We've got a Canadian drug dealer. What do I mean by that? Somebody who manufactures cannabis, right? Before we get in trouble, it's legal, but we have a cannabis manufacturer. We don't see that every day. We've got a military applicant who plays chess, who Mal has dubbed Knight to M7, which I think is a chess joke, which has gone completely over my head. But anyway, we have a military chess player. We have someone who dropped out of undergrad because their parent lost their job and they had to pay the bills. And we've got a lawyer from a magic circle law firm in an emerging market who's looking to go to the US for an MBA. So quite a big transition there. We'll talk about that profile and how they can make the most of it. Right, let's get stuck into the first profile. Firstly, formatting's revolting. Oh my God. I'm just going to verbal diarrhea this.
Two master's degree, kind of a show off, but I like it.
Strongest profiles we've seen this year.
How taming iguanas and lizards taught me about cross-functional management.
Yeah, OP, this isn't LinkedIn. This is Reddit. Come on.
So, profile one. A few months ago, I posted here asking whether pursuing an MBA in Canada is worth it. Now I'm at the stage where I'd like to start evaluating my profile for US and European MBA programs. Academic background, a 7.88 out of 10 CGPA, bachelor's in electronics and instrument engineering from a lower tier college in India. Masters, we know masters don't matter so much, but that's in the US, bioengineering at a 3.67 GPA is what it came in at. Work experience, John, 6 years of experience in manufacturing across biopharma, FMCG, medical device industries, contributed to the COVID-19 Operation Warp Speed vaccine rollout, worked at a top 5 US medical device manufacturing company, and one of Canada's top 2 cannabis manufacturers. Currently employed as a project engineer at Canada's only cell and gene therapy company, funded by Government of Canada, and has a couple of published journals. Also took the GRE in 2016, so I think that is an out-of-date score of 317. Has a bunch of questions, but before we answer these questions, let's give this profile a roast. What do you think?
All right, Sam, we'll start with the academics. These academics make me very nervous. It is true that CGPAs out of 10 aren't factored into GPA reporting that business schools have to make. But that 7.88 roughly translates to a low-ish 3 on a 4.0 scale. Now, obviously, you can do a direct sort of ratio calculation, but it's not typically cut and dry, using that ratio. But I would say it's about a low B plus, between a B plus and a B on that GPA scale. As you've mentioned, master's GPA is better, but these are not taken into account quite as much as the undergraduate is. And that 317 is pretty low, but looks like OP is going to have to retake it anyway. So we'll see how that turns out. Professionally, COVID and cannabis and now cell and gene therapy, very on trend. I'm curious to see whether he's always been an engineer and whether during his 6 years as an engineer and currently today, whether he has any leadership experience that he can leverage, because that's going to be important when you apply to schools. Demographically, he is overrepresented. Extracurriculars, not specify, but note here for me is that extracurriculars is a great opportunity for OP to make up for any gaps he has in leadership. We've worked with a lot of technical engineers, you and I, Sam, and typically that part of their application does the heavy lifting. So goals wise, consulting, I would say the more technical, the better, given OP's background. For instance, LEK is great for folks who have biopharma backgrounds. I will ignore the M&A and PE goal for now. We can talk a little bit about that. And
Hmm.
overall, look, a few red flags, but the priority will be how he does on the retest and whether he has leadership to show for his work experience.
Yeah. Okay. So let's answer the questions then. So, given my profile, would it be beneficial to take the GMAT or a newer GRE, or could I remain competitive for top programs and potential scholarship opportunities without it? I think a score that's 10 years old is invalid now. Correct?
It is invalid, correct. And
So you're gonna have
look,
to
I mean,
take
there
it
are
anyway.
schools, yeah, you take it anyway. There are schools that offer test waivers, but very unique circumstances. And
Yeah.
even if OP submits with a test waiver, your chances are much less are going to be
Yeah.
severely impacted without a test score.
As an Indian male engineer profile, you don't want to be applying with a test waiver if you can avoid it, can you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And then the next question is any feedback or my chances at leading US or European programs would be greatly appreciated. So what do you think OP's chances are overall then at let's focus on US schools first.
I would say probably in the T25 to T30 range.
Oh,
T20 to T30. Well, Sam, without a proper score, I don't know, and I don't know, whether OP has had leadership experience or has a chance to. I'm sure he does, but from what I'm seeing on the profile today, I'm looking at T20 to T20, T20 to T25.
oh. Okay. Now let's paint. I know we're leaping to kind of assumptions here and it's a bit forward looking.
Sure,
Let's assume that OP can reach a let's call it around 320, which is
okay,
pretty close to where he's already landed. A little bit, has a good day, lands a 320. It's nothing special, but okay, has a GRE
sure,
score. And let's say that the goals are LEK consulting, as you say, which I think is the
sure,
right goal for this candidate.
yeah, sure,
And let's be positive and assume that at some point in this work journey, there's been a couple of promotions, which is
hmm
not unrealistic. Well, it's plausible anyway. So really, like, let's assume all the positives of this profile.
yep,
Then where do you see him in the US?
T15. T10,
Okay.
T15 is a realistic target, Sam. Uh,
Okay.
we have worked with students with similar profiles actually,
Very similar.
and who have been, technical engineers, process engineers, software engineers,
Mm.
and they've gone on to remarkable schools, including HSWs. Um, and so, couching myself here, I'm not saying that, OP's chances are relegated to T25 or T30, but assuming what you say is holds true and the test scores hold up okay, I think a
Mm.
320 is probably still below range for someone in this pool. I would think
Yeah.
T15 is a more realistic target at this point.
Okay. Okay. I think that's fair. Anything that OP can do then at this point to reach that T10? Obviously, my big assumption is that
Hmm.
the 320 comes in. Is there
Sure.
anything else besides the GRE that OP can do to maximize his chances?
Obtain killer letters of recommendations that showcase OP's ability to lead a team,
Yep.
above and beyond the scope of an engineer role.
Mhm.
I think I don't see any I don't see any extracurriculars. And so as I mentioned earlier, Sam, I think taking on curriculars right now, right before applying to school, can seem disingenuous.
Yeah. Right.
And so honestly, I think it's probably going to be the test score doing the heavy lifting and finding ways to really reinforce the work experience. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah. I mean, I'm aligned. I'm aligned. I think the GRE GMAT is the key. I think the other big the lever that OP can pull, I think, from a professional perspective, is there are some pretty sexy stories or pretty on trend, as you
Hmm.
put it, professional pieces in there, and they could lead to some very strong career essays.
Oh yeah,
That to me is the difference between OP succeeding here aside from the GRE GMAT, that's the difference between a T10, really outstanding, successful application round and a flop. It's going to be, how can you tell the story of Operation Warp Speed in an interesting way, right? I'm imagining a career goal essay that opens with, team, we got 3 days to get this done. I know it normally takes 2 weeks, but I need everybody on hand. Right? Grab the reader's attention. Operation Warp Speed. We've been selected, my team, whatever, has been selected from millions of potential whatevers to do this particular task. And it's under the cosh, and it's really intense, this few days of work, but ultimately millions of lives were saved. If you can tell that story in a compelling way right at the start and crush the career goals essay, I agree. I think there's a T10 in there, potentially.
Potentially. And that's, Sam, sounds like a lot like a former client of ours who worked for an EV manufacturer and had that exact led his essay with that exact story, and now he will be attending Stanford in the fall. Also worked with another client who, his narrative was on, working on a vaccine that cost millions per dose. And that sort of kicked in this moral issue that he was grappling with, and that drove much of his narrative. And he ended up getting to a T10 school. So
it's super interesting when you can introduce pressure and stress into the career goals essay. And I think this applicant can do it. It's going to take a bit of work, but I think it's there. Studying as well. Do you think there's maybe a round 2 application in here, realistically?
Probably. It really depends on how good of a test taker OP is, and because the essays.
Go on.
Go on.
My gut says that GRE is going to take more than a month, and we're recording 26th of June today, so we've got July, August, and a couple of weeks of September really before the deadlines. We've got about 10 weeks. And let's say that at least 4 of those are GRE studying and testing. If it's any more than that, I suspect this ends up getting pushed to round 2. And by the way, that wouldn't be the end of the world, I don't think. I know that this is an ORM candidate, but a round 2 application with a let's say the difference between a 317 and a 325 GRE with an extra few months of study, which is perfectly plausible. To me, the 325 in round 2 is a stronger application. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And there's that much heavy lifting happening from the GRE. Okay, good. Look, I hope we've given OP something to think about, some targets to focus on, some action items. Let's get on to the next profile. So we have a 27-year-old white male, chemical engineering bachelor's from Georgia Tech, undergrad GPA of 3.4, GMAT 700 on the old test. We have, from a professional perspective, currently an active duty military officer, infantry, leaving the military early next year will have served for 3 years. ECs ran an annual chess tournament, 20 to 50 participants. Created an organization college that did little engineering projects for local businesses. Contributing to 2 chemical engineering research papers. 3 internships in college from lesser known Fortune 500 companies, has very little idea of where to aim, considering M7. Let's roast the profile first. What do you think?
All right, Sam. Academically, I think these are respectable numbers for OP. I think a 3.4 in a rigorous major at a school like Georgia Tech is great. But the reality is that Georgia Tech is no longer a school that has grade deflation. In fact, quite the opposite. Last I checked, the average GPA at Georgia Tech was about a 3.6. And so while schools care about your absolute GPA number, I think they also look at your GPA in the context of peers applying from that school. That's GMAT 700 is fine, but I think for OP's pool, I would say on the lower end for T10s and M7s.
M7 average in the old days was 730, wasn't it?
Correct. Seeing an old classic GMAT score, Sam, is like, seeing like a vintage, Nike Air Jordan on the street. It's so rare now. Um, but
Hmm. No,
professionally,
just hope
look,
it's
I
still
think,
valid. I hope that test score is
oh
still
yeah,
valid. That's probably why OP's kind of applying now, because that's going to expire
sure.
potentially in the next year or two.
Yeah. Well, it depends. I think the classic scores were offered up till 2024, so I think 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And scores are valid for about 5 years. So still some runway, but I don't know when OP took the GMAT. Maybe OP took it while, he was in at school. So we
Yeah.
don't know.
So there might be some time pressure there. What about
Yeah.
professionally?
I like, look, military background. B schools love military, people applying for military because it often shows strong leadership signals, especially at the more senior levels.
Mhm.
Also, a great showcase of discipline, tenacity, adaptability. Would be curious to see, what he's been able to achieve, in his role in the military. You don't have to be out in the field to have an impact. Demographically, so professionally, potentially strong. Demographically, again, male, he's white male in this sweet spot age range. Military and a technical major at a school that's very well known for um, engineering degrees. Extracurricular wise, I think is quite meaningful. I really like that OP has a mix of leadership and opportunities that showcase his intellectual vitality. So he strikes me as someone who is a self-starter, who finds ways to take his interest to the next level. The authorship of those papers, all good to see. All these things, though, seem like they were done at the college level. I would be curious to see if he's done anything outside of college, and that may be tough because he's in the military. But,
Mm.
there are quite a few military folks who apply to school who have meaningful extracurriculars outside their current role. So we'll see.
For context on that, think everybody who's watching who went to undergrad, think back, like pretty much everybody had some sort of undergrad club they're involved with, right?
Hmm.
So having an undergrad club on your application doesn't add much, doesn't differentiate much. Having an having an extracurricular activity while also serving in the infantry, now that's interesting. That's unique.
Yeah.
That's unusual. Ditto if you're working at McKinsey and you're busting your ass for hours and hours on engagements and you have some community activities as well. That's unique. Investment banking, same thing. Investment banking applicants rarely have any extracurriculars because they're working so many hours. The ones that
Hmm.
do, they stand out. So that's the
Hmm.
context that I think John's aiming towards here. So that's the extracurriculars. What about these goals, LDP?
I think LDP is a fantastic goal for OP.
Where did OP say this? Was it in the comments? Um, no. Okay. So let me open this back up. What do you think a good post MBA goal would be for OP?
LDP.
Okay.
And LDP at a company like Amgen works perfectly here.
Mm.
LDPs are very military friendly. It looks like they value folks who can learn quickly on the job and who are able to adapt to different teams. Um, I think a company like Amgen would be perfect here. Otherwise, with OP's background. He can always work in defense or even consulting for a company that works in defense or with government. Booz Allen Hamilton comes to mind. So those are alternate options
Mm.
outside of LDPs, but LDPs are the first ones that come to mind.
The ones
Uh,
that jump to mind for me, actually, just to add to your list, is the Amazon Pathways program. It's
yeah,
where Amazon as a company is very well known for recruiting military vets, especially vets coming out of MBA programs.
sure.
The key thing they're going to be looking for is the ability to use data to make decisions.
Hmm.
Leaders from the military, military is obviously breeding leaders, and it's one of the things that military applicants are known for, as you said. But what they're not often able to do is use data to drive decisions as well as that instinct that's bred into them.
Hmm.
So the difference to me between MBA applicants from the military who do well at, for example, an Amazon Pathways application versus those who do badly is the ability to combine the military leadership traits with the data driven decision making
Hmm.
traits from the MBA program. So That I would add Amazon Pathways in there as well, if that kind
Yeah.
of data-driven decision making resonates. Hopefully it does. Okay, so overall, fairly solid.
Fairly solid, Sam. Yeah.
Great. So let's dive in then and sort of build on that. What do you think? What does fairly solid mean in terms of target schools?
I would say somewhere in the T10 to T20 realm. I would say it would depends, right? I mean, OP is very welcome to apply to M7s. I think with a slightly higher GMAT score, and maybe a stronger display of, or we don't know this. Maybe he's had a ton of great experience in the military, but a showcase of that plus extracurriculars. I think OP does have a shot at M7, but I'm thinking T10, T15 is more in the sweet spot there.
Hmm.
Don't
Yeah,
forget that there are.
Don't forget what?
Oh no, there are a ton of people applying to these top schools, M7, T15, as military as well, and so OP will be benchmarked against those people, and the way that schools sift through that benchmark is your test scores, how much your LORs have sung your praises, how distinct you are as a leader in the military. All those play a role.
And I would add, have you got your shit together in terms of goals?
Oh yeah,
Because there's a key distinction, a clear, we see it all the time, distinction between military applicants who are still in military mode and haven't started that pivot versus the ones that have started researching what they're going to do after the MBA. Maybe they've already started networking. They've got those goals in place. And when I read the applications from those candidates, I'm thinking, yeah, this girl has their shit together. They know what they're aiming for. And the schools see that and think, okay, this person's serious about the pivot to civilian life and to the business world. And I think, well, at the moment, actually, on this profile, I don't get the sense that thinking has been done yet. But with a bit of help and a bit of guidance, I think it can get there. But generally, I'm aligned with your kind of take here. I think a T10 is where OP gets sort of that's medium. That's sort of medium schools. I think the bottom end of the M7 is OP's reach with a really well-crafted narrative. It'd be a waste of time to apply to a Kellogg, to a Booth. I think could be doable.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. I think that's pretty much everything. Maybe just to emphasize that extracurricular point as well. If we are right that all of these extracurriculars are from back in the day, none of them are current. And I do get the sense, created past tense, ran past tense. I get the sense these are all old. Another piece of advice that I would just chuck in here is if you've got something that you're doing in a very casual way as an extracurricular, can you build that into something that makes it MBA relevant? An example I gave last week on the roast is you go running with a couple of friends. Okay, you make your chat group, invite a couple of other friends. Maybe now you've got 5 or 6 people. All of a sudden, you've got a running club. And all of a sudden, you've got a leadership story and a community building story. And on your resume, when you put in the run club, hell, put in the day that you first went on a run with that friend. And all of a sudden, it's a 4-year experience, leadership experience, community building story, and you have an extracurricular. And you might want to use it for, a community story for Wharton SA2. Tell us about the community contribution you're going to make at Wharton. And you haven't had to start something from scratch. All you do is build on what you've already got. So from an extracurricular perspective, I think there's some work that OP can do there. And I think portraying the existing responsibilities and hobbies and activities as extracurriculars could be a nice way of framing the application and could make a difference. I'll add that in as well. Okay.
Well said, Sam.
I think we've more or less covered everything in this profile. I think let's move on to the next one. First thing I see, John, when I see this profile is a 2.9 GPA. Okay, let's dive in. HSW, M7. So funny how we see these people with like a 3.4 who are aiming for T10, T15, and then we see someone with a 2.9 who's aiming for HSW. Right, let's see whether those expectations are realistic. So a 2.9 GPA and a 705 GMAT focus addition. Reason for low GPA, parent lost a job in high school. GMAT, took it a few times, got a 705, planning to take it again and hoping for an extra 10 or 20 points there. Dropped out of college for 2 years, moved to the Middle East for a historic project. Don't know what a historic project is, but it sounds fairly cool. Could be identity revealing, fair enough. A humanitarian project that hasn't happened in the history of the Middle East. And I got an award from the UN from it. Sounds kind of cool. Led a 100-person team for 2 years. That's leadership. Came back and headed special projects for $100 million charity. Started a small business. Working as a PM right now, and planning to apply round 1 this year or perhaps next year. Total 4 to 5 years work experience. So obviously the weakness, 2.9 GPA. Cybersecurity engineering degree. 24 years old right now, maybe a little bit on the young side. Roast it.
I love this profile actually, Sam, and you know me. I love working with folks who come from unconventional backgrounds. So we'll start academically, and we'll knock it out of the park. A 2.9 is scary, but a couple realities here. He entered college early. He needed to support his parent who lost their job, and that in itself is should be its own optional essay, and that could even spill over to be part of his essay or a narrative or a major extracurricular activity. And I think that's a very valid reason. Obviously showing, a much higher GPA specific to the years after, he was able to steer the ship, would help a little bit as well. So academically, yeah, it's a red flag, but explainable. Professionally,
and offset by that GPA, by that GMAT. That's strong, right?
Yes, yeah, that GMAT is strong. On a professional note, I would be curious to see. Well, it looks like OP has 4 to 5 years of work experience. So that age could be, although he's 24, I think you can make a case for applying now or next year. I do like what I'm seeing. I'm seeing, strong evidence of OP being a self-starter with a strong bias for action. I mean, leading a team of 100 for projects that garnered him an award, a very meaningful one. And now he's a PM. I hope there's more to it than what he does now as a PM. He hasn't really shared many details about what he does. But that should, in theory, represent a step up in responsibility there. Overall, I like this profile professionally, although I would like to see him connect those dots a little bit more strongly. Extracurriculars, hopefully there's something in that vein. I suspect that he does have something there. Goals makes sense to continue on in the nonprofit space. I think a company like Bridgespan, which started off as an offshoot from Bain, could be a good path for him. Or perhaps working for a large foundation, brand name foundation like Chan Zuckerberg, or the other one that starts with G. And manage their other nonprofit arms. So I think there's a distinct theme, a theme there. And I think for someone who wants to go into impact investing or working in nonprofits, he really has a genuine story to back that all up. Overall, I like this profile. I think the 2.9 would be a little bit of a red flag still, but I think he has what it takes to shoot for the moon.
Oh, okay. Where to start here? I don't even know. I've got so much to get into here. Okay, let's talk on those extracurriculars. You're right. It doesn't sound like it's not explicitly called out here. But if we think about this logically, the extracurriculars, one of the reasons we're so keen on them is for the leadership stories, the leadership essays, and for the community essays, both of which often rely on extracurriculars. But OP was leading a 100-person team for 2 years. He's not, I don't think he or she, I'm not sure, is lacking leadership experience. Ditto for community building, heading special projects for a local charity, or local for a charity. I think there's probably a community story in there as well. So absolutely, of all of the people who maybe get away with not having that much in the way of extracurriculars, I think it's probably this profile.
Yeah.
Probably this profile. That's one point I sort of throw in here. The other thing I'd like to throw in then is on the GPA. I did a little bit of digging, and I can confirm that last year we had somebody with a 2.9 GPA get into LBS, but it's very low for Harvard. It's very low for Stanford. It's very low for Wharton. Do you think there's a chance?
I have a very spicy take, Sam, and that spicy take is this. I think Harvard and Stanford have greater appetite to take a wider range of people with lower academics. If you look at their absolute range for GPAs, not the middle 80%, the 100% range, you'll see some wild numbers on there. And that's because, in my subjective opinion, those schools are willing to look past academics to find the diamonds in the rough, the ones who have true potential. And I think OP's ability to have corralled all of those people to have won a prize is proof of that, right? And so with a killer essay, with a killer narrative, I'm not saying that OP has a strong shot at those two schools, but he has a shot. And I think that's a shot worth taking.
Wow. I'm imagining what matters most. Stanford are asking what matters most. And he worked on a humanitarian project in the Middle East that won an award from the UN.
Mm-hmm.
What matters most to me is that refugees have the opportunities that other people benefit from. Or what matters most to me is that children don't starve. Or,
Mm-hmm.
there's a very unique story there. The other thing, just kind of putting another angle on what you're saying there, I think it's fair to say Stanford and Harvard have got strong enough brands that they don't
Mm-hmm.
care as much about the rankings.
Of course, yeah. No, they
And
if correct.
if a 2.9 is going to knock their average GPA down by a little bit, they don't give a shit. People are still going
Of
to apply
course. No, I will bet you the application to numbers to those two schools is does not rise and fall with the US news rankings on a year-to-year basis. For some of the other M7 schools, yes, right? If another M7 school gets top place one year, maybe you'll see a bump.
MIT at the moment seem to be doing well in the rankings, and they're probably getting
Yeah,
more.
of course. Hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that's on the Harvard and Stanford side of the application. I want to talk about timing a little bit. My take on this is I don't see any benefit to delaying.
No.
It's not like the GPA is going to improve, right? That's the weak spot in the application. That's not going to improve. Already got 4 or 5 years work experience, which is the average at these schools, bang on the average. I think that from a professional perspective, OP's value add has already been reached. Yeah, might do it a couple of years as a product manager. Like, what's an extra year as a PM going to make a difference when you've led a humanitarian project that won awards from the UN? Like, it's just, you've already got that great work experience. I don't see much benefit to delaying an application. And the GMAT is already a 705. Maybe it proves 10 points. Like, fine.
Yeah.
I don't see much benefit to delaying. What do you think?
No, I think all those things are right, Sam. And I think the absolute age shouldn't be too much of a concern because you're also, if you think about some of these schools, they also have a fair share of deferred admits. And obviously Harvard has a 2+2 program. So you may be getting quite more than a number of people who are in OP's age bracket. And the 24, assuming, OP is 24, by the time they enroll, OP will have, over 5 years of work experience, which in itself is sufficient. I'm already making the assumption that the OP is going to be at Harvard, but yeah.
I would tend to, yeah, I mean, it's 24. If it's 24 right now, and in a year, it'll be 25, maybe 26, be young on the program.
Yeah.
But then maybe it's secure the admit and ask for a deferral for a year. I'm up for promotion in my product manager role, and I think I'll be a better candidate. I'll add more value to the cohort in a year's time, and you ask for deferral. I can see that happening for a young candidate like this.
Yeah.
So what's the conclusion here? I think we're way more positive than OP is. Well, no, OP was aiming for HSW. Maybe let's put it another way. You seem to be way more positive on that than I initially was. I think you talked me
Yeah.
into it. But yeah, very, very interesting profile. One other thing I would say is this looks to me like a case of play the numbers game. OP, if you're watching, some schools are just going to have a problem with that 2.9. In a given year, maybe their GPA average is already looking low, whatever, and you get written off because of the low GPA. This is a case of play the numbers game. You want to be getting 6, 7, 8 applications over the line, M7s, maybe a couple of the Ivy League T10s as well. You want to get those numbers in because I think one or two of the schools are going to be like, we'll look past the GPA in a given round. We'll look past the GPA and we'll give you an admit. But you don't know exactly which schools those are going to be. Yeah, Harvard and Stanford have a tendency to do it. But of the other M7s in a given round, you don't know who that's going to be. So just apply to all of them. Play the numbers game. That's the advice I would give here. Okay, awesome. John, let's move on to the next profile. Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this roast. Let me just jump in really quickly to plug Sam Weeks Consulting. We're a team of top MBA admissions consultants whose job it is to get you into the best business schools in the world. Head to samweeks.com to find out how we do it and to get in touch. We have a Brazilian corporate lawyer working in a magic circle. You don't see that all the time. I've had a couple of magic circle lawyer clients recently, but not from Brazil. So, hello, my fellow people. I have done a similar post, blah, blah, blah. Lots has changed. Right. Brazilian corporate capital markets lawyer, male, 28 years old, working in a magic circle law firm in Brazil. Before that, 2 years at one of the biggest Brazilian law firms. Throughout my career, I've been able to participate in some biggest M&A and capital market deals in the country. At time of application in Sep 27, so we're talking about applying in a year. I will have 5 years of experience at these firms. Studied law from one of the best private universities in Brazil, graduated 2022. But I don't know if my GPA is that good. There's no such thing here. Okay, we'll talk about that. It's hard to get an academic sense, I think. I also finished corporate finance certificates. That said, dream is to pursue an MBA abroad. Has to be M7 to be worth it. Planning on working on RXIB, restructuring, I think that means. IB, which uses law and finance together. Kind of, yeah, sensible. Given this profile, do you guys think it's possible for me to be accepted to such schools? And am I considered URM? Right. Roast away, John. What do you think of that profile?
I like this guy's vibe. Let's dig into it. Academically, I don't know how to evaluate that without a proper GPA. I think I would assume that OP probably has a transcript or at least some kind of class rank, some benchmark of how he has performed in law school. So I'm assuming his program would have some form of that.
Can I just jump in? I think from the wording, my assumption is that it's not that good. I think if OP had crushed it one way or another in undergrad, there wouldn't be a mention here of it at all. I think reading it one way or another, it sounds like the GPA is probably mediocre for the class. That's my running assumption.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think most of the times I've seen from some of our prior clients, they typically have a GPA even if it's out of 10. So there's some number there.
Yeah.
So maybe he just isn't. That's totally fine. Okay. Professionally, I mean, M&A law, that's meaningful because, obviously the law degree and being a lawyer is, a well-regarded career path, and add that to the fact that it's M&A, so it adds a numbers component to the role, which is welcomed by business schools. Demographically, an underrepresented minority, no indication of extracurriculars. The goals make sense. Even better if that long-term career goal is tied to current geography, if he returns to Brazil or has a mission-oriented goal that takes him back to his home country after he spends a little bit of time in the US. That's a typical story that seems to make sense with for someone applying with this background. Overall, I like this profile. And yeah, over to you, Sam.
Yeah. I my read here is that one positive for these goals are that if OP did break into restructuring investment banking kind of in the US, those are some well-paid roles. And those are going to look, the schools are going to like that when they start dribbling over their 3-year post MBA salary number. Yeah, that's going to look nice if they bring this candidate in, and
Mhm.
especially if they care about the change, right? This role in Brazil versus this role in the US is a very well paid role in the US. That 3-year
Mhm.
post MBA salary number will possibly look quite nice. So I think from a
Yeah.
salary growth perspective, I think OP's profile will look strong. My other sense here is there probably aren't any extracurriculars. This is a classic case of what we were saying before, which
Mm.
is that OP has probably been absolutely beasting it at work and hasn't had time for that much in the way of ECs. And I think if he did, he'd have mentioned it here. My sense is there's probably no ECs. Do you agree? And if so, how do you think he can offset that?
I think he might have had a couple ECs in school. Like it's not unheard of for people in law school to be part of a law review or being part of a club or
Mm-hmm.
community, even if it's general interest.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are, I agree with your instinct, Sam. He probably doesn't have any current ECs outside of work. Uh, I mean, even in that case, look, I mean, your prior anecdote about the McKinsey consultant who manages to carve out time for ECs, that can come in the form of joining, an employee resource group, or we call them ERGs at work. Uh, Without the ECs,
Or
I
mentorship,
wouldn't, or
mentoring
mentorship,
juniors.
correct. Mentoring juniors, tutoring people, advising people. I think some of the recreational things that OP is doing, going back to your running analogy, could be fashioned into extracurriculars. Having one or two entries is better than having none. Uh, so I think that's a worthwhile thing to explore.
One other angle is that OP maybe doesn't have direct management experience, but my suspicion is that after 4 or 5 years at a company like that, one of the Magic Circle law firms, probably is managing people junior
Hmm.
to like indirectly on like a project by project basis, on a client by client basis, probably is managing, maybe not directly but indirectly managing either juniors, delegating some tasks to the juniors, maybe managing cross functionally. Perhaps they have some consultants who manage the data room, for example, and they're liaising with
Hmm.
those consultants. I would encourage OP to frame the leadership story that way. Use indirect management experience at
Hmm.
work to cover the leadership stories if there are no
Hmm.
extracurriculars.
Yeah.
That's my sense. Okay, good. Then in terms of, yeah, I guess wrapping on this is where do you see OP landing? Let's be generous and assume that that 325 plus score comes in.
Hmm.
We know pretty much everything else. If you were a betting man, where do you think OP lands?
Um, I think it's a shot at M7. I think T10 M7 is reasonable to assume. I think the role is a very meaningful one. And assuming his GPA is okay, whatever that is, and that 325 comes through, I think M7 is fair game.
Yeah, I'm can be maybe a smidgen more generous actually in the end. I'm leaning towards bottom of the M7. I think is
Hmm.
where OP should be aiming comfortably. I could see a Kellogg or a Booth accepting giving an advert
Sure.
here, and then maybe for the hell of it, especially if the GPA is good and the GRE comes in nicely, throw an HSW into the mix, especially a W, especially Wharton. Throw it into
Yeah.
the mix. I think OP has earned the right to give it a shot. No guaranteed admits with a score in the 320s and a GPA that seems, but I think OP's got the brands, Magic Circle Law Firm, top universities, etc., that you've got to give it a shot at the top schools. No guarantees, but I would say there's the average at Harvard, the sort of statistical admit rate at Harvard is like 8, 9, 10%. I think OPs is more like 15, 20 or 25%. And that makes it, worth a shot.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right. Let's keep going. Next profile, a little bit more generic, I'm afraid. Big Four tech consultant. Doesn't get much more generic than that. Right. We have a Big Four tech consultant looking for some honest feedback. University of Georgia, 3.85 GPA, management information systems. 2 years at Big Four as a tech consultant with a promotion. Hasn't taken the GMAT yet. US citizen, but Indian male. So joint Indian American male applicant. Current comp, 100K-ish. Why MBA? Honestly, I'm at a crossroads. Tech consulting has been a great foundation, but I'm not sure it's my long-term path. So the goal is either MBB consulting or landing an LDP in fintech, tech, or finance. I feel like having an MBA is the clearest path to making that jump without grinding for years. A few questions in there, quite a lot of questions in there, in fact. But let's roast this first, I guess, from an academic perspective.
Those are cautiously decent grades, Sam. I think, look, I mean, a 3.85 from Georgia, that's above all the averages. But OP does come from a overrepresented pool, and hopefully that GMAT or GR is commensurate with that GPA. So, so far so good. Then we go to professional, into the professional bucket. I think it is generic, as you say, Sam. I think adcoms at this point have become so familiar with consulting tracks at Big Four companies, and they know what is considered moving the needle. They know what stands out, and they know how, recommenders write their recommendations. So the recommenders are going to have to stand out. They're going to have to do a very heavy lifting beyond just, markers of performance like promotions and so forth. I worked with a significant amount of Big Four tech consultants, and beyond those LRRs, it's going to be really important for them to talk about meaningful projects that they were selected for, awards that they received. Those are what's going to help separate them from the big flock of Big Four consultants applying to the same schools. So professional looks fine, but I want to know more. Demographically, we've discussed that OPs and ORM. Extracurriculars, we'll see. I don't know if OP has any, but these are going to be very, very important if OPs are aiming for some of these top schools. The goal of going into MBB from where you are now is a very common one. I would say that's a fine goal to produce. But OP's long-term career goal is going to be what differentiates their ambition and how the narrative ladders up to that. It needs to be mission-oriented because there are going to be 100+ candidates like you applying with the same exact background and the same ambition. So there are no red flags with this profile, Sam, but I just don't see anything differentiating this person from others.
Bit vanilla, perhaps. Okay, so let's talk about goals first. I'm surprised you're aligned with that MBB consulting goal. I think if there's anything that could make this profile more generic and more vanilla, it's MBB consulting as a goal. That is what 50, 60, 70% of Big Four consultants are putting in their MBA applications. So, and to me, it's a very obvious way to start distinguishing yourself from them. Your goal, you can write whatever you want for your goal. There's nothing kind of tying to that. It's not like your GPA that's set in stone. And I think a goal that is more aligned with OP's passion will distinguish him from a bunch of applicants who are very quanti, hardworking and rigorous, bit nerdy, and and start to differentiate OP, as you say, from a mission perspective. I think that those LDP goals are a lot more interesting, personally, but I would go a step further and I would say, just what about some absolutely, some completely different and completely unconventional role that is, for example, implementing technology at some random company that you have some sort of a personal alignment with. You know, the classics here are like, I like to go sailing in my spare time, and I want to apply my tech consulting experience to a company that manufactures sailing boats, for example, or a charity that helps underprivileged kids experience sailing. Just a completely off-kilter goal that uses the hard skills, but plays into the passion rather than the numbers. To me, that's a more interesting goal and starts to differentiate OP's application from the 100 others. Do you think that's reasonable? Am I completely losing the plot?
I think that's reasonable. I think that's kind of why, Sam, I had suggested maybe making the long-term career goal the differentiator, because as far as everyone can say, I want to do this super niche thing. Ad comps will know all you do, like you just want to go into McKinsey. We all know. And in
You
this
think I'll see through
sense,
it?
in this sense, I mean, look, if there are clear markers and signals of that passion elsewhere in his application, extracurriculars or something, then yes, absolutely lean hard into that. Um, but my suspicion, my instinct is that there's probably a client that OP had worked with, maybe spent a couple years on, and says, this is the industry I want to disrupt. This is the industry I really care about because at the time that I spent working on them, and maybe I go client side and do something for them as a long-term career goal. First, I need to, address some of these gaps that I have beyond my narrow aperture of tech consulting, which again, starting to sound a little bit generic. But I would believe that, this sort of sailing angle for short-term career goal would work if I see something in the extracurriculars or something that really makes that ambition sound credible.
Yeah.
At present, I don't see those signals.
So you'd have to include it as an activity you'd have in your portal, in your application portal with a description. You'd have to include it on the bottom of your resume under the interest section, really dedicate some space to that. And ideally show that you've been involved in the sailing club, using my example, not just from a sailing perspective, but from like a volunteering to teach young kids to sail perspective, or a management or organization role within that organization. And to signpost that you've already started doing some stuff there to add credibility to the fact that you want to go there permanently. I think that's a given. I think that has to be the case. We have no idea, but it could. My suspicion is it could just be that OP hasn't mentioned whatever that thing is because he doesn't realize how important it is, doesn't realize how it could feature in his narrative. It's often the case where, I'm working with someone and they just drop in that they're super interested in Warhammer or sailing or skiing or climbing up mountains or whatever it is. They've got this super niche passion, but they think, oh, there's nothing to do with business school applications, so I won't mention it. And actually, often it makes a very interesting narrative. And I'd like to explore that because something has to be differentiated here. I think it's just going to sink into the quagmire of other applicants that look so similar. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about let's answer the questions very quickly one by one because there is quite a few. Given my profile, what tier of schools should I be targeting? He says T20. What do you think?
I think that's realistic. I'd say so.
I think that's harsh. I'd say if that GMAT comes in 685-ish, which is low 90th percentile, I think OP has a chance at the Cornells of the world, at the Dartmouth Tucks of the world, T10s.
T10s.
Maybe a bit reachy, but at a shot. And I think if OP is aiming at going T20, I think it needs to have a scholarship.
Yeah.
I think. Okay. What does the demographic significantly hurt my chances at M7? I'm going to answer this bluntly. Yes. Statistically, coming from a demographic with lots of other candidates means that you are by definition being compared against more people, and by definition, therefore, need to have higher scores. And especially this Indian male demographic, IT kind of tech demographic, they tend to do very well on the GMAT. So yes, you definitely need to take that into consideration. Maybe that means taking the GMAT an extra time. Perhaps you were hoping to take it once, maybe it's twice or 3 times. Would MBB or fintech LDPs recruit meaningfully from schools outside of M7T15? That's an interesting question. John?
I think so. I've seen evidence of people who have gone to, schools to T20 schools recruiting for some of these LDP programs. And I think in some cases favored because some of these T20 schools are more regionally located in the Midwest or the South, and those who opt for those schools tend to have a geographic tie to those regions, which means they're more likely to stay in that region. And LDPs favor those who want to spend more than just a year or two in those companies.
Interesting. Yeah, because they're investing in them. They're moving them around the organization and hoping that they'll stay. Interesting. That's a good take. I think I'm going to sort of ignore the MBB side because, as I say, I think that would be a mistake. Even if OP does end up applying to McKinsey, Bain, BCG, fine. But as far as the application is concerned, I don't think that should feature. So I think from the fintech LDPs, yes, M7T15, T20. All of them credible. It will depend a little bit on, the LDP people will be looking at your pre-MBA experience. So if you had a consulting engagement at, let's just say, for example, it's the LDP at a real estate company like Hines, for example, who have a great LDP program helping people kind of enter the real estate construction industry. If you were a tech consultant for Hines in your Big Four role, and you say, I want to join them because they were a client, kind of leveraging the story you said before, I think you could do that from a T20 just as well as a T15, T10, M7. Cool. Okay, by the time I'll apply, I'll have around 3 years of experience. Is that enough or should I wait longer?
I would say that's on the light-ish side. Typically, it used to be 3 to 4, maybe 15, 20 years ago. Well, probably longer than that. Now I think the norm is 4 to 5 plus. I will say if OP has a meaningful advantage of waiting a year and notching additional leadership experience under their belt, then that makes it worthwhile. Whether that's, having more time to progress in a milestone tentpole project or getting to know a recommender better, so that the LORs are stronger, then it's worth waiting. If OP doesn't see much change in that year plus waiting, then I don't think it's worthwhile, waiting another year to apply. But at the end of the day, this is still a fairly vanilla role to be applying from, and OP needs all opportunities to differentiate themselves when applying.
Yeah. On that, my sense is that since he's just got promoted, I don't imagine there's another promotion on the line anytime soon. So my take on that is get on with it, OP. Get on with it. Get the test under your belt and apply this year. It sounds like OP's at a bit of as he says, at a bit of a crossroads. A bit fed up. I read that as I'm a bit fed up with my current job. And if that's the case, right, channel that sentiment into test taking, into studying, into applying, and get your application in. And if you, like we said before, if you need to defer it because some great engagement comes up or something, schools are generally open to a deferral from a younger candidate like this. But my sense is OP's just been promoted, is pissed off at work. Fuck it, get on with it, apply. Okay, so last question then. This one tickled me. There's a bonus question. Somebody asking, do MBA programs train people to view everything through an ROI lens, or do they simply attract people who already think that way? Something I've noticed about MBA type thinking is that nearly everything gets reduced to gains and losses, not necessarily short term, but even long-term decisions seem to be framed as investments. Under this mindset, spending time, money, effort on something is either productive, wasteful, or justified by some future payoff, even if things are difficult to quantify, like employee well-being, relationships, loyalty, culture, or simply doing something because it has value in itself can get translated into business outcomes. Does MBA training encourage people to see the world this way? Or Are people already, is it people that already have this transactional and highly efficiency focused mindset who are naturally drawn to MBA programs? For people who do not naturally think this way, does this mean that an MBA might be the wrong choice? I'd love to hear your take on this, John.
I think, look, an MBA is not a vocational degree, right? You don't need an MBA to practice law or medicine. And yes, it is natural for OP to think this way. When people ask me, based on what I want to do, does an MBA make sense? Typically, the answer is maybe they need an MBA to, an MBA is typically strongly encouraged so you can advance in your role or pivot careers and so forth. But the more intangible things that people look towards an MBA for are things like building a network, learning learning a new trade, just getting back into school, being a student again, uh, experiencing a new city and a new geography. All those things can't necessarily be quantified, and the payoff from those may not be felt until maybe years after you graduate. And so, yes, I think there is some element of ROI here that schools tend to think more, students tend to think more about. But at the end of the day, I think it's just an MBA degree it's very hard to do that with an MBA degree. I think this person is overanalyzing this a little bit too much. What do you think, Sam?
I think it's a valid point. I like to I kind of include my work experience in this as well. It's not just MBAs. It's for me, it's sort of I worked in finance, and in finance, you had definitely a big cohort of people who were who thought of everything in terms of an ROI. And I think my take on it is that it was a way for them to hide their lack of EQ. I had a manager who used to say something like, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Mhm.
And that kind of, that to me is an ethos of everything should be quantified, even relationships, even all of these things. And it's not how my brain works. It's not how my brain works. And I think it's half of the cohort, but it's not the other half. There are plenty of people on an MBA program who think more like me, which is the quantifiable stuff is a bonus. But I'm going into the MBA to build relationships. I'm going into the MBA to have that network, which I can't quantify, and I don't intend to quantify. It's also the people who are kind of cutting it on kind of on the edge financially, who are having to stretch financially for the MBA. They're the people who start quantifying it and start justifying it with numbers. The people who either have a big scholarship or who maybe have some family money to to cover the MBA, or maybe just earned a ton before the MBA and therefore can blow, $200,000 on an MBA without it affecting their balance sheet. Those people are the ones that tend to be thinking about it in more obscure, more kind of softer terms, and don't necessarily overanalyze it into an ROI sense. So I think my opinion is there are people like this, but there are also people who are not like this. And you see that in work, you see that in MBA world. I think it brings out the MBA world because of the sticker prices are so high. Not because it necessarily attracts that many people. It's just that people who are having to stretch financially feel the need to justify that with calculations. Bit of a meandering answer there, but
But
yeah.
in true MBA response fashion, the answer is it depends.
Classic. What does it depend on?
Oh, it depends on how you see on how you see the world. It depends on what you want to get out of your experience. So yeah,
And how much
it's
and how much money you have to play with?
correct.
Yeah. John, on that note, thank you very, very much for joining me again today for this roast. If you've been watching and you've enjoyed watching other people get roasted, well, it's time to step up, share your profile, and let us give you some constructive advice as to which schools you should be applying to, how you should be improving your profile, and when you should be applying. That was a big question that came up today. Was round 1 this year, round 2 this year, or should I be delaying until future years? Get in touch and we'll help you with these all important questions. John, until next time, take care.
Bye, Sam.